The tale began beneath the white ribs of the Tower of Ecthelion, where parchments sleep and dust remembers. I, Marion of Ithilien, ranger sworn to Prince Faramir, was summoned to the archives of Minas Tirith when autumn bowed low upon the Pelennor. A grey Lord Warden had prized open a worm-eaten coffer wrested from the rubble of Barad-dûr. In it lay a shard of black glass, thin as a fingernail and colder than moon ice. Around it, penned in a crabbed hand, were words of the enemy's own Speculum Cineris Taciti, the mirror of silent ash. It is said, the Warden murmured, that in the choking years after the downfall of Númenor, when Sauron put on a fair shape to beguile the East, he made a mirror to bind voices to his will. Not sight, but sound it drank, guzzling oaths and names until silence lay where speech had stood. The mirror was lost in the ruin of Mordor, or hidden. Prince Faramir's seal bade me go, swift yet unwitnessed, lest rumors spread among the folk of Gondor. I was to learn if such a thing still slumbered, where the arid Lithwi cast their iron shadow, and, if found, to end it. I took my bow of Lebethron and a long knife that had tasted orc flesh when I was but a stripling beneath the eaves of Ithilien. From Emin Arnon I set out, not alone. Laerith of the Greenwood rode beside me, tall and grave, her hair like pale beech bark, her eyes the color of Ithilien's pools. From Aglarond came Baraz, a dwarf of the glittering caves, broad of shoulder and red of braid, with a hammer named Heartqueller, and a song for every mile. We swore a quiet oath there in the stables, where the city's lamps burned steady, to follow rumor into ash, and to return if we could. We crossed the Anduin by Harland, dawn upon our backs, and the white city dwindled like a star set in frost. Ahead lay the green hush of Ithilien, and beyond that, all that had been broken and not yet mended. The land of the moon was tender with new growth since the king's healing. Cypress and bay breathed, foxglove nodded among old stones. We moved as rangers move, in leaf and shadow, and the birds sang answers to Lareth's gentle whistling. Yet eastward the wind bore a bitter taste, as of iron burned too long. On the third day, we found an old watchpost near the Harad Road, only a ring of tumbled blocks and a half-gnawed banner staff. But Baraz went still as he set his palm upon the stone. There was a voice here, he said, long and low. It has fled. Elves hear leaves, dwarves hear stone. Lareth smiled. Men hear each other when they remember to listen. We laughed softly and passed on, yet her jest clung like dew. For of late, the folk of the east and south sent embassies whose tongues clove to strange courtesies. Peace is a collar easily slipped. One must listen for the link that failed. By dusk of the sixth day, we stood in the wastes of Udun, where Cirith Gorgor opens like a wound. The towers of the Teeth lay felled, and their crowns were mounds where thorn took root. Beyond the Morannon, a desolation lingered, black as if the sky had fallen to earth and shattered. Our horses balked, so we loosed them to graze what scant green lay behind us and went forward afoot. There, in the ash, I knelt and pressed fingers to that dead dust. It whispered like 1,000 moth wings. I thought I heard my name. No, not spoken, but taken. We skirted the dead marshes, or even tamed they are not a place to dally. The candles still rose in the gloam, white and hollow, and the faces beneath them kept their cold counsel. Lareth drew her cloak tight, and Baraz hummed an old lay of Khazad-dûm, soft as an underground river. Sing low, he said, where the dead might mistake a tune for breath. The wind brought another song, thin, reedy, and solitary, as of a shepherd piping on the borders of Nurn. We saw no man, but the air quivered, and the tune broke off as if a hand had covered a mouth. Laerith's eyes sharpened. Something drinks the sound, she said. Not the leeching of fear, another hunger. We made our camp upon a barrow of clinker, high above the fen. The stars were a fierce company, and the sickle wheeled like a mailed fist. I took the middle watch. Near dawn, a hush fell greater than the hush of sleep. The ash at my boots went slick, and glassy, a skin upon a pond. Within it, a shadow moved, not mirroring my face, the shape of a helm with a rent in where an eye should be. I spoke a word of my childhood, one my mother had kept for me alone, Talinor, meaning brave by candlelight, and felt it pry from me, a thorn pulled from flesh. The surface brightened, and the shadow smiled without a mouth. I kicked the ash skin to shards. It shattered soundlessly. We came to the smashed courts before the Morannon as gray dawn bled up. There we found those who still knelt to Old Master. A band of Easterlings, cloaked in scaled silk, picked at the stones as crows pick at marrow. Their leader wore bracelets set with obsidian flakes like frozen tears. He hailed us with courtesy and asked our errand, but his eyes had the habit of trying to own what they looked upon. "We walk the king's lands," I answered, "and ask no leave of carrion." Swords came out like sharp breaths. Baraz drew Heartqueller, and Lareth's bow thrummed. A lark's note turned to iron. We worked as a rope is worked, each strand bearing the other. The Easterlings had courage and grace, but they were not the first we had met who loved the fallen darkness for the order it gave to their fear. Their leader, called Tulbazar, as we learned, fought me to the ragged edge of the broken gate. Close at hand, I saw that beneath his silk, he wore a tight cuirass of some black glass sewn upon leather. When my blade glanced along it, it gave the feel of ice and stale breath. He smiled, as if at an old jest. "You seek the mirror," he said. "So do all who ever held a tongue." Lareth's arrow took him clean through the bracelet, pinning his wrist to the ruin. He made no sound, not silence born of discipline, helpless silence, as if the power to make a cry had been tithed from him and spent elsewhere. He bared his teeth, and the rest withdrew, drawing him after like sea debris tugs a drowning man. We watched them go among the smashed teeth of the gate. He wore its slivers. Baraz muttered, "Who binds glass to blood serves what glass remembers." We climbed the bristling throat of the arid Lithwi through a rift where once a furnace branch had poured toward Gorgoroth. No birds sang there. The rocks sweated cold. The way narrowed to a slot where a man could barely pass, and a dwarf must turn his shoulders sideways. Lareth ghosted ahead, the gray of her cloak a second shadow. The air cooled in the downward ways until our breath smoked and fell. "Listen," she said at last. We halted, and I heard it, the bare suggestion of water without wetness, a whispering not through air but through something heavier. We came into a chamber as round as a ring and high as a watchtower. The ceiling had cracked in the great fall, and a single beam, pure and pale as the morning of the world, fell upon a pool that was no pool. It was ash pressed to glass, yet softer than glass, a skin laid over fathomless depth, the mirror of silent ash. No reflection caught there, no face, no rock, no light. The beam from the roof died at its lip, like a bird stunned against a window. I thought again of the shadows that make a house bright by the hearth, because the night lay beyond the walls. Here, the night had come inside. Baraz knelt. Dwarves trust stone the way sailors trust a line. He held his ear near the surface, and his beard hairs lifted, as in a breeze. "It tastes of names," he said, grim, like a ledger that was never closed. We set our hands to the work we were sent for. Lareth bound a cord about my waist, and Baraz set a piton at the lip of the chamber. I leaned near the mirror's edge and spoke a name not mine to give, Udun. The surface scarcely trembled, yet down in its dark, I felt the echo of that place, hot and secret. I spoke another name, Mithrandir, and heat turned to cold, a wind in mine ears, and a bell that did not ring. I opened my mouth for a third word, and my tongue forgot how to shape it. Lareth's hand caught my shoulder and drew me back. "Enough." Her voice was thin as thread stretched near breaking. Baraz winced and shook his head, as if clearing water from his ears. "The mirror doesn't show," I said. "It gathers. It lays a hand upon the living word and turns it into sleep." "Not sleep," Lareth said. "Bondage. Oaths are the road by which evil travels, and also the chain with which it is bound. Sauron knew both crafts, and made a vessel to drink pledges and keep them from ever reaching the light. So the Eastmen, Faraz growled, whose collars are forged of syllables they cannot unsay, seek the vat where their masters poured the brew. His eyes softened at Lereth. And we? We break it, I said. We made to set charges of dwarven fire brought up from Aglaron, no more than a half satchel, for we did not trust the mountain's bone. But as Baraz planted the first, a shape moved in the beam above us, a man at the lip of the crack. He knelt, and the light was cut by his shadow. The chamber dimmed. Marion, he said, in a voice that wore my name like a key fitted to an old lock, son of Sirion's coast, sworn to Faramir, who was healed of a black breath. You were expected. Tulbazar. He had wrapped his bleeding wrist with a cloth smeared with pitch. Behind him, half seen, stood others, whose faces were careful and bright with zeal. Do your work, he said, very courteous. We need you to. Tulbazar's tale came out as a merchant weighs coin, one piece at a time, each placed where the buyer can see it. Long before your king sat upon the white throne, my people learned the old road of obedience that bends a man's head before it breaks his back. In Rune, in Khand, in the dust beyond the sea of Nirnan, a vow has weight enough to drop a man to his knees. The Dark Lord took our words and turned them to iron. When he fell, the irons did not end. The chain wins on through petty chieftains and pale priests who wear secret instead of crown. The mirror holds the hoard of oaths and names and words spoken in fear. Break it, Ranger, and the chain breaks. Lereth's fair brow knit. He speaks of freedom. He speaks as a fox speaks to a hound, Faraz said. He names the ground the hound stands upon as if he built it. Mark the bracelets, elf. He is already bound to a thing that drinks speech. True, Tulbazar said, and smiled to show even teeth. I am bound to what I seek to end. Those who came before me sought to use the mirror. I seek to spill it, but the vessel will not break for us. It will break for you. What difference? I asked. He bared the inside of his forearm. There, cut shallow and carefully, were runes I did not know. They bled not at all, as if the blood behind them took counsel with another master. We are marked. The mirror will take our breaking as food and grow fat. But the tongues of the West, of Gondor, of elves, of dwarves who sing the old clear names, those are not its meat. If you shatter it, it dies. Lereth stood between us, eyes like winter rain. And what is loosed when it dies? For the first time his courtesy faltered. The words it holds, names that were swallowed, oaths that never reached the ears for which they were made. Perhaps the chain that coils our throats would loosen. Perhaps other things would hear. Other things, Faraz repeated, and the chamber felt smaller. We set the fuses regardless, though my stomach had learned a new knot. Lereth paced the circle's rim, saying under breath the old melodies that keep an elf's mind fastened to light. Faraz's hands were sure on the charges. He was a craftsman deep as roots. Tulbazar and his folk watched from the lip, silent not only in custom. Once, as I passed near, he said, "We will not hinder you, nor strike, if you do this. If you refuse," he showed me his bracelets with a tilt of the head. The flakes in them seemed to tremble, as if a breath passed beneath their glass. We finished, and the fuses lay like black veins across the floor. I took the taper. I thought of the white tree and the king's laughter in the high hall, of the green hush of Ithilien, of a cottage beneath the beeches near Emyn Arnon, where a woman once sang to me and braided my hair with river grass. She had a voice like willow shade on water. She had no grave. The war took it, or the dark. Marion, Lereth said gently, your eyes have gone far, only to the place where voices live, I said, and put flame to fuse. The spark ran like a running deer. I drew Lereth and Baraz with me to the shelter we had chosen, behind a dropped tooth of stone. The chamber breathed in, long and slow, as if surprised to find lungs in its chest. The mirror did not shiver. The fire touched the first charge, then the next, and there was no sound. Not a thunder, not a crack, not even a sigh. The ash skin flashed white like frost in sun, and turned, before our eyes, to a powder so fine that it did not fall. It hovered, the whole lake risen to a cloud. Lereth clutched my arm. Faraz swore without sound, his lips shaping an oath too old for the air. Tulbazar laughed, but there was no voice in it. The bracelets on his wrist reflected 1,000 tiny moons. The cloud breathed. It reached for our mouths like a lover. I clenched my teeth, but breath must be had. The ash filled my throat, cool and sweet, and slipped down like a word learned too early. When it touched my chest, I heard it, the clamor of 1,000 names, all at once, all unsaid. The air filled with the noise of silence breaking. We had not shattered the mirror. We had uncorked it. We fled. There is no other word. Even elves run when mountains breathe against the back of the neck. We scrambled into the light like swimmers breaking a skin of ice. Behind us, the ash cloud roiled up the crack and spilled along the slopes of the arid Lithwi toward Gorgoroth, and wherever it passed, sound waned and died. The wind stopped its talk. The pebbles made no skitter. Far off, a ring of ravens rose from the teeth of the Morannon and moved their black mouths without voice. "What have we loosed?" Faraz gasped, his chest heaving. "The horde of oaths," Lareth said, white to the lips. "They will find mouths. They will seek the throats of those for whom they were meant. And if those throats are dead, they will go hunting for the nearest that shares their shape, meaning men, dwarves, elves, we three." Tulbazar's folk fanned out along the ridge, their bracelets bright as fish scale. He stood with them, his pitch rag dark on his wrist. "You did as I asked," he said, and though no sound came, I heard his meaning, as one hears thunder with one's bone. "Now we do as we must." They drew knives of that same glass and cut their palms wide. Blood fell without splash and hung there in the air like garnets laid upon velvet. The cloud bent to it, and each droplet darkened to smoke. And in that smoke, a face appeared, small, childlike, cruel. They opened their mouths and breathed those faces in. Their eyes went white. "They have let the chain sit upon their own tongues," Faraz said, horrified. "They will carry what we freed." "For whom?" I asked. "For the one that waits," Lareth said, and looked east, beyond the plain, beyond the Sea of Nurnen, beyond even the edge of the map in the king's maps room where soft hands turn pages. "Not Sauron. That cup is broke. But there are other thirsts. The world is older than his shadow." A memory broke like a fish through my mind's surface, my mother's hands folding a cloth, her voice low. "If ever a word is stolen from Merion, do not chase it. Words know the road. They come home, or they bring home what follows them. We made for Orodruin, for there is a law in the world that where a thing is forged or ended, there it is weakest. The day boiled pale, and the night froze. The plain of Gorgoroth lay like a scab struck from the earth and wetted again. The fissure where the mountain cracked breathed warmth like a sleeping hound. In that breathing, the ash cloud slowed and swirled as if tasting the air. We lit no fire, we spoke no words, yet still the cloud found us. It settled around Lareth like a mantle. She straightened, her face gone still as if listening to a far harper. "Long ago," she said softly, "in Eregion, we sang to metals and asked their names, and they told us what they wished to be. Some begged to be bells, some doors, some bright thin blades. A few wished to be mirrors. We taught them how to show without taking. This one learned the other craft." "Who taught it?" Faraz asked. Lareth turned her face to me. The mantle stilled. "You know, I did not know, until I realized that I had been hearing not only the clamor of 1,000 unsaid words, but a single word beneath them, repeated as a drum repeats the shape of the song. It was my childhood name, not Merion, but Talinor, the word I had given the mirror in the marsh. It had followed us, as a hound follows its first master. And then the world cracked open as quietly as frost breaks under a foot, and the truth stood there, simple and thin. The mirror was not merely a vessel. It needed a bearer, a keeper. It had one once, and that keeper had stood not in Mordor, but in Ithilien, under a beech where a child learned to speak brave by candlelight. My mother had not died. She had been spent. She had given her tongue into the keeping of the mirror, to hold a door shut that led not to Sauron's halls, but to a room behind every vow, where all words that bind stand like chained dogs, waiting. The plot had not been theirs. The Eastmen, the priests, the shadows. It was mine. My life had bent toward this, since a voice braided my hair. Lereth, I said, and now my voice shook. It must be kept, not destroyed, kept and watched, lest it sip the world. She did not smile. You speak as those who understand the making of things speak. A bell may ring freed, or ring a warning. A chain may bind or be broken and lashed. Will you be its keeper? Faraz's hands clenched. And pay what price? Lereth knows, I said. So do I. What price? He demanded. My voice, I whispered, and the ash cloud leaned closer, tender as rain. We climbed to the lip of the mountain, where once a hobbit had crawled, and a poor, crooked creature had danced and fallen. The wind there remembers. We stood at the brink of the wound where fire used to live, and now only the echo of fire abides. The ash cloud hovered over the chasm, unwilling to pass, as if the world's breath gathered here and drew too deep for comfort. Lereth placed her hand upon my brow and spoke in the elder tongue, words that do not break even when kingdoms do. Faraz set Heartqueller between us and the drop, his head bowed. He did not argue again. Dwarves know the old price and how they are paid. I knelt and took the ash into my hand. It was cooler than I had thought. It thrummed, somewhere within it, like a deer at the edge of brush. My childhood name flicked an ear. This is my vow, I said. And the mirror drank each syllable even as I shaped it. By white tree and by water that runs from Mindalluin, by the green hush of Ithilien and the copper doors of Aglarond, by the stars that walked over Eregion when it was young and the long grief of Khazad-dûm, by the laughter in the high hall of the king and the beach where a woman sang, by all these I bind my voice to the keeping of the mirror of silent ash. Let what hunts for oaths hunt me, and find me a wall. Let words spoken in fear be given haven, and not a chain. Let none master the horde of sound. Let it sleep or wake only to warn. Then I breathed in, as if I had been drowning all my life and had just remembered air. The ash flowed into me like a river turned. I felt it settle behind my breastbone, in the little hollow where old soldiers place their medals and their hurts. It hummed, and for a moment I heard 1,000 voices, some laughing, some weeping, some so weary that they had forgotten they were sounds at all. Then they quieted, as children quiet when a lamp is turned low. When I opened my mouth, nothing came, not a whisper, not a cry. Lereth's eyes shone. Keeper, she said, and bowed the bow elves, give to things they will not try to own. Faraz grunted and cuffed my shoulder, hard and warm. You stubborn twig, he muttered. If you wanted to be a bell, you might have said. I smiled. I could still do that. Behind us, Tulbazar and his folk stood upon the ridge, their bracelets dead and dull, their mouths working like fish that do not know why the sea is empty. He saw what I had done, and rage broke him beautiful as a black wave. He hissed a curse, silent, and flung his knives down the throat of the mountain. Without the chain's music, his oaths fluttered like torn banners. He was free of a leash without knowing where to walk. Lereth turned to him and spread her hands as if to offer a path. He spat and went down the slope, his people trailing after like crows after a plow. We came back by starlight across Gorgoroth, through the Morannon, where the wind found its voice again, into the green of Ithilien that smelled of rain on stone. I did not speak, and still we were not empty of speech. Lereth hummed low melodies, and Baraz stomped his steady beat, and between them I learned a new grammar made of gesture and breath, and the way a friend stands nearer than he has to. At Eamon Arnon, Prince Faramir met us upon the steps with Éowyn at his side, their hands clasped like promise. They asked the tale. Lereth told it, plain as bread. I opened my mouth once to add a thing, and remembered that I had given that coin. Keeper, Faramir said softly at the end, and his eyes were old and kind. We will make a place for you. A cottage waits now beneath the beeches where the pools hold the sky. There is a bell at the door, and when folk in the vales of Anduin or the high houses of Minas Tirith feel a word catch in their throats, when a vow must be made that will not become a shackle, when a confession must be spoken that will not be turned to a knife. They come and stand where the ashes are sweet. They speak, and though I cannot, I hold the speaking. It is heavy work and light. Baraz returns each spring with tales of Aglarond and a new verse for his hammer's song. Lareth comes with the turning leaf, and we walk the sunned paths where once we crept in shadow. Sometimes we go to the border of the old dark and look east. There are still priests there and petty kings, but the chain's music is less. Words find their right ears more often. Tul Bazar rules a small market town where oaths are short and trade is long. He has never come to my door. I do not ask him to. On winter nights when the fire makes the room a little world and the wind rubs its back against the roof, I think of my mother's hands and the way she tied knots in string to teach me counting. Some knots hold a sail, some bind a wound. The mirror hums behind my ribs, and in that humming, I sometimes hear the echo of a beach by water, and a song brave as candlelight. I do not speak, but the world is full of voices. May it remain so, and if ever silence comes, thick and hungry as ash, it will find me waiting. Epilogue: The Bell Beneath the Beach. The years that followed were not loud, yet they were not empty. They rang like the pause after a struck bell, when the sound has flown outward and the world holds its breath to hear how far it will go. In Ithilien, the beaches grew thick, the pools kept stars for their guests, and the cottage beneath the hill gathered its own small hoard. A broom worn smooth, a table notched by a dwarf's careless knife, a coil of green twine kept for mending nets, and a bell suspended from a beam of Lebethron, fashioned by Baraz of Aglarond, with a lip as thin as a leaf and a heart of hardened steel. The keeper lived there, and if he did not speak, still speech happened around him like weather. Children came first, as children are first in all reckonings that err toward hope. They were sent for their untamed tongues and their oaths. No one should ever hear save the moon and the Maker. Some were sons of rangers, their hair smelling of grass and horse. Some were daughters of the orchards, brown-kneed and sly. One was a boy from Pelargir who had been found in a net, nameless as a shell. They stood upon the threshold where the bell hung and spoke the promises they could not bear to bind, and the promises they needed too. The bell gave a low, clean tone each time a word passed into the room and did not return to bite. They went away lighter, though no coin had changed hands. Lareth of the Greenwood knew all their names. She wrote them in a book of ash-gray paper, not to keep, but to loose, the way one writes the shape of a river, only so that no bridge will be thrown where the water runs deepest. Each spring she came through the eaves of Emin Arnon with the smell of far rain in her cloak, and each autumn she went lightfoot northward, where oaks remembered bright voices and long patience. She carried the seasons between woods like a harper walking between halls. Baraz of the glittering caves came with the spring floods, singing to the stones of Gondor as if they were little cousins who had strayed from a feast. He hammered the lintel straight when winter shrank the timbers, and set the hearth right after a wind came down from Mindalluin and sulked in the chimney. When he laughed, the cottage creaked as if reassured. When he went, he left behind some tool perfected beyond sense, a kettle that never scorched broth, a hinge that used silence for grease, a small, stubborn lamp that refused to gutter in any draught, and that Lareth swore had learned how to listen. Men and women of the East came too, not all at once, not in banners, not with the proud, unhearing look of embassies. They came like travelers whose feet have discovered the map the mind forgot. Some wore the old bracelets with their dead flakes of glass. Some had cut their arms where old letters used to be, and the scars were pale, as if light had dwelt there. They had words that would not obey them. They had vows that had been taken with the throat and not with the heart. They stood beneath the bell, and the keeper met them with eyes steady as a river stone. He had no voice, but he had hands. A hand may absolve as surely as any word. The bell would sound, and they would bow, as they had been taught to bow to tyrants. Then they would straighten, having learned the other bow, the one given to a friend. From Minas Tirith came messengers with the king's seal, white and living. Elisar, son of Arathorn, sat long years on the high throne, and there were hard harvests and sweet. And in some winters a wolf was glimpsed upon the Pelennor, gray as the thought of age. Yet the king's laughter did not thin. Many nights he rode quietly to Ithilien with only one companion, and the two would stand beneath the beech and speak of things too high for courtyards and too tender for courts. Arwen Undomiel came once, and it was like a quiet snowfall in summer. She did not pass the threshold, but she touched the bell with one finger and smiled. Later, the trees of Ithilien bore a hush the way an orchard bears scent. Those who walked there afterward were gentled without knowing why. There were storms, as there must be, for peace is not a wall but a field, and fields belong to weather. Along the marches of the Ephel-Duath, petty kings rose with borrowed tongue. In Rhûn, a cold priest tried to weigh children against coins cut in the shape of eyes. He found that his scales tilted always toward mercy, and he could not tell who leaned upon them. South along the Harad Road, a banner higher than a mast was raised, black trimmed with indigo, and a clever warlord wrote the names of his enemies upon the wind, only to discover that the wind would not carry them, because the wind knew the keeper and owed him a song. Rumor made a root of the cottage and called it by many names: the house where oaths grow gentle, the door with a bell, the ash place, the quiet hearth. Rangers who had run long paths in the old war learned to sleep there without hearing screams under the bed of their thoughts. Merchants, cautious as cats, learned how to promise without making chains. A miller's widow brought a bundle of letters that had grown barbs whenever she tried to open them. She left with a basket of bread and no fear in her finger. It was a house that did no miracle, and yet it kept a garden in which many hard things bloomed. Once, one night when Mindolluin had wrapped its shoulders in cloud, and the Anduin had put on a skin of pewter, a knock came upon the door like the tap of a staff upon stone. Lareth opened, and a figure stood there swathed in dark, small and bent and very old, with great eyes that had learned too much and forgot too little. He smelled of wet rocks and lost lanterns. In his hand he held a cord tied with no knot at all. Faraz rose from his stool, all beard and broadness. "Be welcome," he said, and fetched another seat, as if to make a third leg beneath a table that might otherwise wobble. The stranger stepped within as one steps into a story that might not be theirs to finish. He looked at the bell and sighed, and his sigh sounded like many sighs braided into one rope. Lareth brought tea. The stranger drank, eyes closed, and the steam from the cup made a small crown on his head. At last he spoke, and his voice seemed to come not from his chest, but from across a water. "I was named once," he said, "and the name was taken from me, and I do not ask it back. Yet I have a promise to make, and no one left to hear it. Will the bell remember such smallness?" Lareth glanced to the keeper. The keeper nodded and set a hand upon the beam. The bell gave a sound low as a mountain's purr. The stranger smiled through tears that would not fall, and he said, quite simply, "I will not be cruel." The bell answered as if a great oath had been sworn in a king's hall. The stranger sighed again, and the cottage felt larger, as if something that had been hunched in one corner had stood and stretched. He went before dawn, leaving the cup washed and set upside down upon the shelf, like a full moon fallen on its face to rest. No footmarks showed beyond the threshold when Baraz opened the door. "Some guests," he muttered, "are old enough to remember how to walk without bruising the earth. There were burdens, too, and not all were brought by strangers. Silence is a good servant, but a poor master, and it would sit sometimes upon the keeper, as a hawk sits upon a branch it thinks will hold forever." On such days he walked out under the beech and counted the ribs of the leaf, or laid his palms on the bark and felt the slow grammar of sap. Lareth would stand nearby and braid a cord with no knots, and then unbraid it again, as if reminding the world that choosing and unchoosing can be the same art. Baraz would hammer something that did not need hammering, merely so that he could be there and be useful. Friends are the tools with which one mends what cannot be mended. In harvest time one year, when figs split with sweetness and the air was crowded with bees, a messenger came from Osgiliath, bearing tidings no man may refuse to hear. The king was dying. All Gondor knew it before the words reached the ears of the hawks. Pain makes its own trumpet. Lereth and Baraz looked to the keeper. He stood, set his hand upon the bell, and closed his eyes. They went by night, 3 shadows moving along the old road, swift as a memory. The stars followed, because even stars will be courtiers when a good king lies down. Minas Tirith had made itself small for him, though it was a city carved of light. Fires burned low, doors stood open, and women sang in kitchens because they did not know what else to do with their hand. They passed the Tower of Ecthelion, where the parchments sleep and dust remembered, and they were brought to a chamber, where a white banner hung as if it had learned how to hold breath. Elisar lay upon a bed carved with leaves. Arwen sat beside him, with a stillness that taught the air how to bear weight. He smiled when he saw them. "Keeper," he said, and his voice, though soft, had not forgotten how to command the courage of other men. "Will you do a last small thing for me?" The keeper inclined his head. "Hold," the king said. "Hold what wishes to fly." The keeper set his palm lightly upon the king's breast, and for a moment the room tasted of the dead marshes and of Ithilien at noon, and of a small boy's word learned in a cottage without a grave. Then the taste turned sweet, like apples that have been kept too long by someone careful. The king breathed out once. The bell beneath the beech, though no hand struck it, let fall a note that went down through the levels of Minas Tirith like a river. The city wept and was not drowned. Arwen took the keeper's hand and laid it against her cheek. She did not speak. She did not need to. Lereth kissed the queen's brow, an elf's kiss given like a lantern at a parting. Baraz stood, knuckles white around his hat, and said nothing, because Khazad do not turn grief into furniture. They left by the same halls they had used to come, and the city watched them go as a child watches the door through which its father has just passed. Winter that year kept to the road and did not stray in the field. In spring, the white tree learned a new green. The world continued, which is a greater bravery than any men think to sing. Time, which walks softly in the houses of the healed, went about its business. Tul Bazar grew older in his market town on the far road. His bracelets were kept in a box with cracked hinges. Sometimes he opened it and looked in, and did not know whether to be grateful or ashamed. He never went to the cottage. Pride is a harness that can be loosened and yet still leaves a mark beneath the hair. Children who had once stood beneath the bell returned with sons and daughters of their own, and said, with the carefulness of those who have learned their measure, "Here is a promise we would make, if it please you." The keeper bowed them in. He did not own the promises. No one owns such things. Yet he gave them a room where words could wear their true shapes, and not the masks fear knits for them. One summer drought visited the vale. The Anduin went narrow, and fish swam in water clear as lye, and men in Anorion muttered over empty cistern. Someone must have angered a spirit, they said, for men are fond of blaming what they cannot water. The keeper walked to the river's lip, and stood with his feet in the mud, cracked like parched parchment. He bent his head and pressed both hands to the hollow beneath his collarbone. And those who watched said later that he looked like a man apologizing to a friend for being late with bread. The bell did not sound. The wind did, though, once, twice, and then a third time, falling upon the river like a hand upon a harp. After that, the rain came. It came in a good way, without winds that break roofs or sheets that drown wheat. It came as if it had remembered how to walk. The folk in the taverns fell quiet, and then someone laughed. And then someone sang a song about a water jar mended with faith. And if that jar sounded very like a bell, no one said so loudly. Lereth wrote a lay then, though she never sang it in great halls. She sang it in kitchens, and in places where old soldiers sit with blankets over their knees. It had no refrain, because some things must not be bound to return before they know whether they wish to. Baraz, hearing it, hammered a rhythm into a bar of steel and declared that even iron could be taught to keep silence on the beat. The bell in the cottage learned that rhythm and became a steadier bell. The keeper aged, for such men do. It is a brave foolishness to think that the world will let its best keep the strength of spring forever. His hair went salt gray. A fine net of lines took hold of his eyes, as if many smiles had passed that way and refused to leave without mending what they had touched. His hands grew more eloquent, for they had to do what his mouth could not. He could scold with a glance, forgive with a breath, bless with a palm upon a brow. Some nights his chest ached with the weight of what he held, as a river aches when the thaw comes and it must be both ice and flood at once. On those nights, Lereth built the fire high and told tales of Eregian's clear morning, and Baraz brewed a liquor that tasted of stone warmed in sun. Once, a last once, war threatened, sharp and sudden, as if the world had woken from a good dream with a tooth split to the root. A lordling beyond Nirn, half priest and half merchant, found a phrase with corners sharp as a brand-new coin, and he pushed it from tongue to tongue until the air cut mouth. Men marched upon one another not because of blood or bread, but because of a sentence that had learned to be a spear. The keeper walked out at dawn and did something no one had ever seen him do. He lifted both arms as if to cast a net. His fingers spread. A wind came down off the ashen mountains that smelled of nothing at all. It blew across the fields of Gorgoroth and the pastures of Nurn, across the tents and the half-built palisade, across banners and blade, and the tight smiles of men who believed themselves right. When it had passed, the sentence lay on the grass like a snake that had not yet learned how to be a snake. No one could remember it. They remembered the faces they had meant to cut. They did not remember why. Most went home, embarrassed. A few stayed and shared bread because it seemed a waste to let the ovens cool. Someone said, "We were made for better oaths than this." And someone else said, "Who taught you that?" And he answered, "A bell." After that, the phrase dried up. Phrases are flowers that die when bees refuse them. The keeper's last winter came gently, like a hand placed upon a fevered brow. Snow fell soft upon the beach, feathering each branch until the tree seemed a memory drawn in white. Lereth kept the hearth fed. Baraz's beard shone with frost when he came in from chopping. The cottage was warm as a breath held for a friend walking a dangerous path. The keeper sat in his chair by the window, and the world stood outside like a loyal hound. He lifted a palm once, and Lereth drew near. He wrote with a finger upon the frost-blurred pane, not letters, but the shapes of ideas, the way a river writes itself upon a bank. She nodded, eyes bright. "We will," she said. Baraz laid his hand over theirs and grunted, because some promises sit better without words upon them. They carried him, light, for he had given away much of what men use to weigh themselves down, beneath the beach, and there was a chair waiting already, for wood knows some things without being told. He sat, and the bell in the lintel within the house single tone, and the ash within his breastbone stirred like a bird waking. He closed his eyes. An hour passed, or a year. Lereth later said that the sun moved, the shadow of the beach did not, and time was forced to walk around it. When he opened his eyes again, the world had grown a little larger to fit what had come to rest. He smiled. He raised one hand and touched the bark behind him in greeting, as one touches an old door that has always open. Then he let his breath go out and did not call it back. There were no trumpet. Even if there had been, the bell would have taught them how to bow. There was the sound of a bird landing on snow and finding it will hold. There was the soft crackle a fire makes when a knot, tied when the tree was young, becomes light. There was the sense, a sweet ache, that a word long held safe had finally found its right ear. Lereth and Baraz did not speak for a long while. They had built their lives upon a silence that was not emptiness, and they honored it now as one honors a spring, by not muddying it with hurried feet. When at last Baraz cleared his throat, It sounded like a mountain deciding very gently not to fall. "The bell," he said gruffly. "It will need a new keeper." Lareth shook her head, smiling. A small, bright, winter bear smile. "No, bells do not need keepers. People do. We will keep them, as we were taught." They bore him to a place beneath the beach, where the roots descended like a braid untying. There were no stones with name, for the earth already knew what it held. Lareth sang, but if anyone had been there to listen, they would have thought she was speaking, for the song was low and close, and as simple as mending. Baraz set a piece of lebethron over the place, planed smooth and rubbed with oil until it shone like a quiet thought. Upon it, he scratched no rune, only a line, thin and true, that ran from edge to edge and did not end because the wood ended first. And then the cottage went on being a cottage. That is how the world pays its highest compliment. The door stuck in damp weather. The hinge worked loose and then was set right again, with laughter. Children came, and old women, and hard-handed men with hope they would not admit, and youths who had learned words from the wrong mouths but could still relearn them. Lareth stood in the doorway and made tea and listened. Baraz hammered and grumbled and listened. The bell listened most of all. Sometimes, when the sun fell in a certain way through the leaves, there was an added hush, the kind a room takes on when someone who is not visible nevertheless occupies the best chair. On such afternoons, Lareth would turn to the door, unstartled, and say, "You are here," very mild, as if greeting the smell of bread. Baraz would nod to the empty chair without embarrassment, and then turn, not because the air asked him to, but because courtesy is the best patron of miracles. Far east, in a town that had once been a camp, Tul Bazar stood at an open window and watched a market make bargains that would not break their makers. He wore no bracelet. He had learned, slowly, to grant thanks without lending out his pride in the same breath. When he closed his eyes at night, he heard sometimes the faintest suggestion of a bell, and in his sleep he stopped counting enemies like coin and started counting mornings like gifts. Beyond Greenwood, where leaves speak the oldest consonants, Lareth walked sometimes alone and felt beneath her feet the old roads of the first songs and found them less lonely. Beneath the mountains, Baraz taught a young dwarf how to polish a hinge without thinning it. And when the boy asked what music to hammer by, Baraz put the hammer down and said, "Listen first, there will be a bell." The boy listened and heard only his own blood, which is the beginning of wisdom. And in the city of the king, where the white tree sifted light upon the court, a child born of a line much worried about by genealogists learned how to promise without the aid of notarized witnesses. She would become someone men later knelt to. She would never learn how to love change. The bell had taught her from a distance, as bells teach. If ever you pass through Ithilien, traveler, and you come upon a stand of beeches that have grown wise by listening, you may hear, if you are careful with your feet and unwilling to hurry, a bell. It will not clang. It will not call you to battle or to table. It will make the sound a hand makes when it lets go of a thing without dropping it. Step beneath it. Say the word that is hardest to say. Give it the shape you truly mean, not the shape fear thought to give it. The bell will answer softly. The tree will remember. The air will keep your secret without ever letting it become a weapon. And if silence comes again to the world, thick and hungry as ash, if there rises in the east or in men's hearts a thirst for vows turned into shackle and names put to the yoke, then the path to the cottage will be found once more. The bell will be mended if it needs mending. The hearth will be stoked. Lareth will come out of the green, and Baraz will come out of the stone, or those who learned from them will. The door will open to hands that have labored, and to mouths willing to be humble. There will be, as there has always been, a chair by the window. For though a voice has gone into the keeping of the earth, the oath it bore stands yet between the world and the hunger beyond it. Words find their right ears more often. Children grow braver by candlelight. The wind remembers how to carry only what will not bruise. And under a beech that leans over still water, A bell shaped by friendship waits patiently to be kindness made sound. This is a small ending, which is to say, it is a good one. Great endings make gardens into monuments. Small ones let gardens be garden. The ash is quiet. The mirror is kept. The world, though scarred, speaks. And what is spoken, if it is true, lives.